man, are we doing the right thing? Should we quit?
Where do you think this story starts?
It was around 2018 where we decided to make the vision much bigger. So we became a lot more excited and ambitious.
The quality of medical care starts long before a doctor sees a patient. It begins in how we train them. In medical school, Shiv Gaglani saw an opportunity for something better. There was so much to learn, but with lectures and readings alone, somehow it just wasn't enough to make things stick. That frustration became Osmosis, a new way to teach medicine now used by millions around the world. In this conversation, we talk about reimagining how doctors learn, returning to medical school with fresh eyes, and Shiv's newest venture, exploring how our homes themselves can shape our health. Let's dig in. Shiv, thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation.
Thanks for having me, David. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. So you've had a really interesting journey. You're on a really interesting journey, and lots of places to start that I've been thinking of, but I'm curious, where do you think this story starts?
Oh, wow. How far back do you want to go? I think the most interesting part of my journey is, especially given the climate now, is I benefited a lot from moving to the U.S. My parents are multiple time immigrants. They were born in India. I was born in Africa, Namibia, and grew up in South Africa. And because the U.S. was so welcoming to my family in the 90s, my mom's a physical therapist, and Florida wanted more physical therapists for obvious reasons. They opened this pathway that totally changed the trajectory of my life, my sister's life, my parents' life. And we're very grateful to the U.S. for opening its doors to us. My sister and her husband are very successful dentists in Chicago who own several practices. My parents have done a great job growing up my mom's physical therapy practice. And then I obviously was able to benefit by starting this company, Osmosis, and now several other companies since then that would not, I don't think, have been possible had my parents not moved us to the U.S. in the 90s.
Wow. That's those things decades ago make all the difference now.
Yeah, totally.
I'm curious how early in your life you were thinking about something medical. It sounds like your family has a rich history of providing care and working in the medical area. When did you decide?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in South Africa, my dad he's a retired physician. He used to run a hospital down near Durban in a small little town called Harding. And so my first memories of, take your son to work day or take your shit to work day were literally going with him to the hospital. And I didn't really know what he did. Obviously, I was 4, 5, 6 at the time, but I knew how he made people feel because I met the staff who worked with him. I met many of his patients and the parents of those patients. And I just remember how much respect he had because of what he had done. So everyone I had met alongside him was so grateful to him and his team for the work they did. I thought that was pretty cool. And I had a similar experience with my mom, a physical therapist who at the time was working for a school in South Africa with children who had developmental difficulties like cerebral palsy or other mobility issues. And, similar story with her. And so very early on, you can say partly it's the South Asian heritage, but largely it's because of the lived experience, seeing the effect they had on people around them and the positive impact they had on those folks. I knew I wanted to also pursue medicine. And then when we moved to Florida, I grew up in a place called Cape Canaveral. My area code is 321 liftoff. And so very high tech area, lots of amazing engineers and developments. And I got very interested in engineering and the combination of healthcare and engineering. And for a long time, wanted to become a surgeon who made medical devices. Obviously, when I went to med school, eventually that changed a bit, and I became a lot more interested in the preventive aspect of healthcare as opposed to the reactive once somebody needs some tertiary care.
Wow, what an interesting blend, especially living in a 321 area code. That's you can really see those two worlds coming together. You shared a little bit about your experience as a medical student, some of the frustrations you encountered that sound almost like the itch that led to you to start building what grew into Osmosis. I'm wondering, can you remember a specific moment, a specific time when you were that early med student and sort of banging into the wall of traditional education?
Yeah, well, I remember a couple things. So I'm again grateful to Hopkins, where I went to med school, for being very supportive of me taking time off to build Osmosis. Because not only did they let me do that, then I was able to defer for literally what I thought was going to be a gap year became a gap decade. Um, and Hopkins was very unique in that it allowed me to defer for that long and then come back and finish. Now there's obviously more policies in place that don't allow that kind of thing, but fortunately it worked out. But I remember when we started at Hopkins, they talked about this thing called the Flexner Report. And those in medical education will know what I'm talking about. But essentially, this gentleman named Abraham Flexner in the early 1900s was tasked with studying different med schools and trying to figure out what made a good quality med school, ultimately train good quality physicians. And it was a very important report because there were a lot of like fly by night establishments that would give people medical degrees, but not necessarily they didn't deserve it or they weren't practicing medicine up to standards. And so Flexner really helped shape what would eventually become the preclinical and clinical aspects of medical education. And his model for the best medical school was actually Johns Hopkins. So 100 years after that, when I was enrolling at Hopkins Med, they were still sort of bragging about this report, which they had reason to do, but it was 100 years old. And so I remember that distinctly from, I think, the dean's address. And then a couple months later, anyone who's gone to med school understands the frustration of what is called the parade of experts, where you go to these great med schools, you go there to learn from some of the best researchers and some of the best clinicians. But unfortunately, a lot of med schools are not taught by the best teachers. And so the preclinical portions of med school tend to be very dry, tend to be kind of this parade of experts where like we had a Nobel laureate named Carol Greider who helped discover telomeres. Wonderful researcher, obviously a Nobel laureate, really shaped our understanding of that important part of cell biology and genetics, but wasn't the best at teaching. I realized, Khan Academy was getting popular for K-12 at the day back in that time, that like her didactic lecture could have been 10 minutes recorded and just hit the points that most med students should know about telomeres. And then for those who want to do research or really understand where the state of the art is, they should spend the next 30 minutes just listening to her research. And so we had these initial ideas for how to make medicine less frustrating, more efficient, more enjoyable. And that was actually the impetus for Osmosis. We wrote a paper for a journal called the Annals of Internal Medicine titled, "What Can Medical Education Learn from Facebook and Netflix?" And the whole thesis of that paper was we can take all these things from Silicon Valley that engage users, that get them hooked on products, bring that to education and make education a lot more fun, similar to how like Duolingo has made language learning fun. So those are just some of the ideas that initially we had, and we turned that frustration into opportunity with Osmosis.
That's so cool. It is so interesting to hear, even when you're breaking down what a lecture like that could have been, because it's almost like I'm hearing the early building blocks of how you started to think about creating this content and creating something that was snackable, interesting, memorable. Can you describe some of the earliest pieces of content you made and what you were what your thesis was? Like you kind of unpacked what you would have liked in a lecture. I'd love to hear how you translated that to some of your first videos.
Yeah. So initially, a lot of people know Osmosis, obviously, for our YouTube channel and our videos. We've made thousands of videos, 5 to 10 minutes generally, and everything from, achalasia to Zika virus, A to Z, physiology, pathophysiology, etc. And now a lot more in nursing and PA and other fields. But what most people don't know is that the first things we started building on Osmosis were very much a tech platform. And the idea was, look, we're spending all this time in lecture learning about our professor's research, whereas our incentive as a med student is to pass the USMLE exam. Back then it was graded. Step one was, not just pass fail. So there was a lot more writing on getting a good step score. Why don't we bridge the gap and feed two birds with one scone, as one would say, and take our professor's lecture, that Carol Greider lecture on telomeres, upload it to Osmosis, automatically recommend the Khan Academy video on telomeres, a paper on telomeres that's really interesting to those who want to study it, a set of questions that are USMLE relevant on telomeres. And so initially we started doing this through a recommender system. And now anyone who's used ChatGPT knows how easy it is to upload a document and get all this content from it. Back then it was a pretty novel thing. And so that was what we originally built was these little private groups where people could upload lectures, they could crowdsource questions, and then we'd recommend content. And that's actually how we got to know the Khan Academy medicine team, because we tried building a partnership with them to recommend their content alongside our lectures. And then over time, we started getting to know that team really well. I got to know Sal. Sal wanted to focus on K-12, and the Khan Academy medicine team wanted to focus on medicine. And so we recruited a lot of the great teammates from there. It was win-win. Probably the most influential one we had was Tanner Marshall. He's the voice of Osmosis. He was the one who initially came in and had a biomedical engineering background, was a wonderful illustrator and voiceover artist, and started creating, I think the first couple of videos were on like biochemistry, on free radical damage, I think was one of the first videos. And we didn't know how it would go, but we started getting good comments. And then we started a release schedule of 1 to 3 videos a week. Kyle Slim was an excellent project manager who helped lead that. And we were kind of shocked with the reception. Within a year, we had 25,000 YouTube subscribers. There was a lot less competition back then, and even less because in the last 3-4 years, as you know, with Gen AI, people are just releasing content left, right, and center. It's so much content out there. So distribution is really hard. But back then, a decade ago, when we started releasing these Osmosis videos, there was competition, but distribution was a little easier if you created truly good content.
You mentioned within a year you were sounds like you're a little almost off to the races. How long did it take within that year to start seeing traction? And you mentioned comments. What did traction look like in those very early days?
Yeah, well, fortunately, we had a core business, which was the documents and the question banks that really helped support us so that we could be more experimental with the videos. Traction started looking like a couple of things. The objective metrics of, obviously views, likes, follows, subscribers over time, right? All these are vanity metrics, all these numbers which go up and to the right. The question is, is January 2017's new subscribers appreciably more than January 2016's, right? So year over year, month over month growth was more important than just the vanity metrics of how many subscribers we had. So that was important traction. And there was subjective traction, which was actually reading the comments. And there's a great Paul Graham essay he started by Combinator called Do Things That Don't Scale. And one of the things we did that didn't scale was we talked to all of our users regularly. I was the main customer support agent for Osmosis for many, many years. So personally had like 10,000 or more conversations with different learners on the platform on YouTube. And I got this intuition beyond just me as a med student. I got this intuition about what people were saying. And so some of the comments it struck me were starting to come from nursing students, from practicing PAs, and even from patients and family members. And that really expanded our vision, where originally we thought Osmosis was just going to be a platform to help US med students pass exams and, have a better time in med school. But as I started reading these comments and engaging with these people, I said, wow, we could be a lot bigger. And it was around 2018 where we decided to make the vision much bigger, which was everyone who cares for someone will learn by osmosis. And that was modeled after Nike's vision. Nike's vision was to provide inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And that there's an asterisk they put over athlete, which is if you have a body, you're an athlete. They basically said everybody in the world could be an athlete and thus could benefit from Nike. So we said everyone who cares for someone. And that's not just the med student, your physician who learned by osmosis when they were in med school. It's also the PA or nurse. But more importantly, especially in this age of democratization, it's the parent, it's the patient themselves who, if they get a diagnosis of COPD, they go watch an osmosis video and understand what COPD is. If they have a child who has a rare condition like hereditary angioedema, then they look it up on YouTube, they find the osmosis video. And so we became a lot more excited and ambitious with our vision, largely because of that signal we were getting from the subjective comments as far as traction goes.
So many incredible insights on what you just shared from talking to people directly and sort of getting your own learned experience about what your audience is interested in and uh, the way you approach this as everybody who cares about everyone who cares for anyone. Is that, am I,
Yep. Everyone who cares for someone learns by osmosis. Yep.
that's incredible. I'm really curious when we think about YouTube, at least now, maybe not in 2016, so much data on click through rate, on audience retention, on videos that they came from, on what they do next. Did you ever have to get into those weeds, or by the time things got so granular, you had such a strong base that you were able to keep going with the practices that you had?
No, we definitely got in the weeds. And again, Tanner, Kyle Slynn, a gentleman named Vince Waldman, who had a PhD, very data driven, all really led the charge. They went to VidCon, which is the main YouTube conference, and early on we even we did some A/B testing around the thumbnails, which obviously Mr. Beast very famously popularized how important a thumbnail is for just people like deciding to click on your video. Um, Collaborations, which channels do we feature? How do we get featured? We learned a lot from educators, obviously the Khan Academy Medicine experience, but other channels, learning channels that gave us a lot of free advice and help. And then we also gave back to the community, which is why we often featured much smaller channels in the early days too. So like one thing as simple as putting on your header of your YouTube channel, new releases every, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Basically, that was a huge, huge thing that proved that you get more subscribers, because by by leading with telling your subscribers when you're releasing videos, they come to expect it. And that was really helpful, because this isn't just one random channel that releases videos every few weeks. We were like, hey, stick with us, and every week you're going to get 3 new videos that'll help you pass med school or whatever it may be. So we did a lot of testing, and now there's a lot more data. I will say the YouTube team was extremely supportive and very helpful. They even have a whole YouTube health team who we partner with deeply during COVID, especially, and then with our rare disease education campaigns, led by Dr. Garth Graham and a wonderful woman named Errol Altman, who were very, very helpful with osmosis, especially in the post 2020 years.
They have a fantastic team for health over at YouTube. You've spoken about your decision to leave medical school in those growth days as being a difficult decision. What was the narrative that you were telling yourself at the time? What was your expectation for your own future?
Yeah, I think we get fixed to certain identities, and my identity was to try becoming a doctor for many, many years. And it was kind of shocking to my friends and my family that I would jeopardize that by leaving med school to something I'd worked on for decades to do something else. But the real things that made it much easier were it was not a irreversible decision, right? We were taking a gap year, not we weren't dropping out. And so that always makes things easier if there's always a path back. And worst case, if we dropped out and it was not the right decision, you can always just reapply to med school and get into med school later. So I think people put a lot of stock in, they tend to put things in terms of absolutes, and they say it's a path A or path B, when actually there's a path C that's sort of intermediate to path A and path B. So we de-risked the decision in a couple of ways, one of which was, again, how do we feed two birds with one stone? And we realized that by publishing papers about education theory, like that one in Annals of Internal Medicine, that helped us not only get clearer with what we were building, and then help develop some B2B partnerships, because we were publishing papers that mattered. B2C didn't really care as much, but B2B seemed to care. But then if this thing didn't go anywhere, we had some published papers that would be helpful to any med student who's looking to apply to med school. So we found that we could kind of feed this. And I actually went to business school in between. And a lot of how I managed business school was I took a lot of courses that were project based. And the project was, pick a company that you want to work with. I picked my own company, and I was able to get a bunch of free and really awesome advice from fellow business school classmates who, for a semester at a time, worked on osmosis with me. So always find creative solutions of ways to have, as they say, have your cake and eat it too, as long as you know when you're full. That's the problem. I think a lot of people, they don't understand when they're like overtaxed and they try doing too many things, stretching themselves too thin. But if you know you can handle, both A and B by going through C, and you know that you won't take A, B, D, and E, like, you have breaks. I think it's possible to find creative ways to do or two or three things at the same time.
You use such a great analogy about you can have your cake and eat it too, at least as long as you know when you're full. I have such a strong sense hearing you talk about these days and these building days as this kind of very clear mission and sense of purpose and running towards something as fast as you can. And I'm so curious, at the time when you were growing so rapidly and turbocharging your work with business school classes and all of that, what was your dream for what Osmosis could become fully realized as you were growing it?
Thanks for the question. And I do want to kind of, for anyone listening, kind of make it clear too that we have this narrative fallacy. And like, especially when I've hosted a bunch of podcasts. When you listen to a podcast, it's, you're trying to squeeze a decade's worth of experience into, 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And, as Steve Jobs says, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. We all create these narrative arcs, and they become true because they're the ones we repeat to ourselves and to others in formats like this. We had a lot of times when we're like, man, are we doing the right thing? Should we quit? Like, it was not off to the races. We had a lot of, we had competitors pop up who we initially were very focused on competitors, like any new first-time founders are. And then eventually they realized that competition doesn't matter as much. You just got to execute on what you know. We had B2B clients who came on and then left and, went to a competitor. We had mishires. We had fires. We had, videos that dropped that we spent a lot of money on that had no traction. We had people complain about the quality of the content. So there were a lot of problems along the way. And so I wish I could say, yeah, it was a nice growth rocket ship. It was not. And even the story of our sale was, good timing, great fair market, stars aligned, but also a bit of burnout. Like also, we decided not to do the Series B and we had 2 Series B term sheets, largely because we had been working on this for many years and we were a little burned out. And I could not confidently say that I would be the best CEO to take it independently, / the market could support a Series B stage company. And we, I think, made the right decision because other medical education companies that raised the Series B wound up having to do down rounds or layoffs or didn't get acquired. And so I think I just want to make sure that the audience, anyone listening, knows that it's much more difficult. And I like to be real with people. So one thing I like to also invite people is if they've listened this far to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I regularly WhatsApp memo with people who are building because I have a lot of empathy for that. So anyways, I wanted to caveat all of this by saying, like, we did not know how big it was going to be. It was not smooth sailing. And I will say that a lot of companies who've developed deep vision and are changing the world initially weren't trying to do that. Like, they were trying to solve a very specific problem. Like Osmosis, I mentioned, we were just trying to help make med school suck less and be a little more fun and efficient and do some cool tech along the way. Then we had to pivot. We pivoted into content. And then it was only in 2018, after we had been working on this for several years, where we realized, wow, our YouTube channel has gotten pretty big. The comments on the YouTube channel are pretty exciting because they aren't just med students. They're all over the world, and they're all these health professions and patients and family members, which I care about most as a section and then or segment. Now let's make a vision. And so I think a lot of companies that if that are name brands wind up creating the vision, mission, values later once they have something, because those first few years are just sort of the wilderness, and very few people, unless they're like have incredible foresight and determination, probably the prototype does not become what actually goes to market.
I'm so glad you called all of this out. I think the wobbly path that isn't always visible in retrospect, and just I think what you just shared is probably a very big service for folks who are almost intimidated by the mountain that you've climbed now when they hear about this story. You kind of rattled off a bunch of scary challenges, tough moments. Do you see any of them as an inflection point? And is there any story that comes to mind as a turning point that might not be visible to everyone kind of reading your interviews online?
Yeah, there's so many of them, but one that comes to mind right away when you were sharing that was we were trying to build a partnership with a large name brand journal that also had a bit of an education ambition around it, right? And anyone who knows me knows I'm very like approachable. I like to be partnering and, you know, sometimes I would say like you lead with trust. And then if someone breaks that trust, you give them one more chance. And if they break it again, then it's kind of over. Fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And so this journal, like we led with like forget NDAs. I think a lot of founders make mistakes of being too closed. They think their idea is worth so much, and it's really about execution. I led with the opposite of like, let me talk to people, and then it attracts good people who are interested in like very collaborative. Even competitors in general, I view it very collaborative. This one hurt though because it was very early on in Osmosis's time, and we didn't have as much thick skin and business learnings. But there's a large name brand journal that we're like, oh, if we partner with them, it could really change our trajectory. And we like gave them multiple presentations, talked about doing deals with them, being a tech platform for them. And then they kind of went silent for 6 months. Didn't respond to emails and whatnot. One person in particular there. And then 6 months later, a YouTube video dropped where like they were building their own platform all along that borrowed a lot of things from us, including something we had done pretty unique, which was multiple choice questions that ask for your confidence before you get the answer. So we kind of tried calibrating people. So they literally did this. And I was like pretty upset, flagrant. And this was where the benefit of having a co-founder is helpful because my co-founder was much more calm at that time. And we balanced each other out. When he was upset for something, I tended to be calm and vice versa. So it was kind of a nice buffer. And so I remember that distinctly because it hurt a lot, taught me a bit about trust, and then it ultimately taught me that didn't matter because ultimately, that a product I think shut down. It was all about execution, and I'm Hindu, or I was raised Hindu, so I believe in karma. And ultimately, the reason I say competitors or collaborators, Elsevier, which bought us, is a competitor that they wound up being a collaborator that bought us many years later. And partly why they did was they liked us as people, not just as a product, but like maintaining good relationships with people is always to say it's a competitive advantage makes it sound so Machiavellian to be like, oh, I'm going to be nice to this person because of eventually. That's not the case. Like, I think what I realized was we have much more in common with our competitors, so-called competitors, than we do with any random person because they're in our market. They're trying to improve medical education too. We're all like trying to do better. And really, if we're competing with anybody, it's like Netflix, right? Because somebody could watch Netflix for an hour, or they could learn via one of the Osmosis videos or another company's videos. So really, we should all go after Netflix and say, stop rotting our brains. Like, let's watch this stuff. But yeah, anyways, that was a big lesson. I tell founders not to worry too much about the competition too early on.
Wow, that must have been a difficult lesson to experience at the time, but saying that it worked out is an understatement. More just that when you look back in retrospect, it seems like one of those moments that you probably have a lot of compassion for yourself going through that back at the time. It's interesting how you were talking about competitors just now and how, after all, when you do business with people, it helps to like them. I think about that with networking so often. I always find myself intimidated by the prospect of networking, and networking doesn't feel like something that I'm good at, but really talking to people that you like and making connections it's what it's all about. And especially with what you're describing right now with finding a business partner or a company to partner with down the line.
Yeah, it's also one reason like why when we were messaging on LinkedIn, I was excited to talk to you again because we've had very positive interactions over many years at conferences, and I've enjoyed your LinkedIn content and your innovation around creating content and using different AI tools for it, and your building in public persona. That's what life's about, because who knows if any of these initiatives are going to go anywhere, and I didn't know Osmosis was, but if you at least have a fun day-to-day experience because you get to interact with, mission aligned, values aligned, just cool, interesting people like yourself, that makes it worth it. Even if there's no outcome, like the journey itself is fun and enjoyable.
That's really kind of you. Thank you for saying that.
Totally.
I have a LinkedIn question for you actually that I was saving for later, but I think I'd love to dive into it now. You shared a really interesting chapter in your life after you were acquired, and maybe we might go back and dig into some moments there, but you went back to medical school. And not only did you go back to medical school, but you shared it with these really neat shorts on LinkedIn, sort of talking about your experience going back to medical school with these a new set of metaphorical glasses on that you saw things through. I'm really, really curious what insights you took away re-entering med school with a decade more experience and with this radical new vision that you'd seen education through. I'd love to hear some of that.
Yeah, totally. It was a really interesting time to be back in med school because I re-enrolled as a third year med student the summer of 2023. ChatGPT was like 9 months old, 9 months old. And it was good. Like, I would plug in some patient cases, obviously removing any HIPAA identifiable information. And it was good at like coming up with a bit of a differential. But it wasn't reliable enough and the scribing was not very good. By the time I finished in May 2025, 2 years later, I've been doing this too. It was better than most residents I had met in terms of differentials and you know, and so that's largely why I decided not to do residency, because I realized that if I was going into a knowledge specific residency, like certainly like a pattern recognition one, like radiology or dermatology, I would, without procedures, I would, very quickly be doing a disservice to my own patients by like, trying to become a pattern recognition person myself. So it was a very interesting time to be back in school, and it reinforced what humans do best. And I met so many amazing clinicians, people like Dr. Al Casillan, who's a transplant surgeon, who spent so much, dedicated so much of his life to making sure that his patients could get lungs and have a new shot at life. Or, Hedvig Harlow, a urologist, pediatric urologist who like lived, breathed, and slept. How do we get hypospadias patients and kids a normal life and people with bladder exstrophy and stuff like that? So I was really happy that I went back to med school because I saw what humans do best, and that deep caring that humans will have in the best situations, the nurses, the PAs, the doctors, really inspired me. And then the families. I mean, as a first year or two med student, which is where I burned out of med school a bit and then decided to start Osmosis, I did not appreciate this as much when I was actually in the clinic and was in the conversations, helped with the conversation around end of life care or, cancer diagnoses. It was very meaningful. I'm really glad I did it. And also the frustrations that I had a decade ago, which I was very impatient, said I would start a company to solve this. The frustrations were still there. Like we still had parade of experts lectures, and it was not like all the pedagogy was fixed 10 years later. But my patience for the frustration was higher, and my ability to kind of differentiate between the emotion of being frustrated and the opportunity that frustration allows. So reframing that frustration as like, wow, this is a good opportunity. So every time I felt a frustration about how something wasn't working, like we had a patient who spoke Vietnamese only, and I don't think she got the best care because, there was always that friction to get a Vietnamese translator on board. And I was like, this is a solved problem now with state of the art Vietnamese AI, but 2 years ago it was less reliable. It was just like very motivating to see that frustration. And then like I left med school with a whole list of Apple notes on like problems to work on. And that's largely why I went back, is to identify these frustrations, reframe them as opportunities for things to work on and improve. So I'm very glad overall I went back, and there's a whole bunch of lessons I learned that it would take multiple podcasts to go through, but it was a good decision, I think, overall.
That sounds like a great decision. And those frustrations, it's funny how some things are kind of timeless. At least they're timeless right now. And I mean, even honestly, the language barriers, that is such a painful example to see play out, because I mean, I agree with you. It's a solved problem with AI. You could argue it was a almost equally solved problem with telephone interpreters being available, at least at these big academic places. And still, you have the time crunch that teams are in, and they know someone isn't really understanding, but they're just going to kind of motion and point to things and get on with their day. It really, it's so interesting to sort of see a pain point up front and really understand what it actually means. Um, you pegged the birth date of ChatGPT with your re-entrance back to med school. I I'm so fascinated by, I wouldn't even call it the potential of AI, like literally the AI that we are living in and swimming in now. Do you have any thoughts when I'm not maybe thinking a year or two from now, but 2035? Do we even have medical schools? Is that just an upload to our neural chip? I mean, have you sort of imagined what education might look like a decade from now?
It's funny, that is one reason we call it osmosis. We want an education like learning to diffuse into your brain very
Yeah,
easily. And if you think about that famous Matrix scene of how he goes in a kung fu simulator and then wakes up and is like, I know kung fu.
I
I know how to
love
fly a
that scene.
helicopter.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I think all of us who came of age during that movie, like that is how it should be, right? Like where you can just kind of learn things so quickly. Um, I think obviously I'm very optimistic about AI in education. One is I think kids early on, the like I know one laptop per child, the MIT Media Lab initiative was mixed and helped some kids, didn't really help some other kids. I think largely because, just giving someone hardware isn't a solve for education, just giving them an iPad, or in some ways it's counter to it because a lot of education should be without the screen.
Hmm.
But I think giving every kid a stuffed animal that basically is Aristotle, that gets to know them. And, in the absence of having a mentor or several mentors, good parents, other mentors who could do that for them, having a stuffed animal that sort of is your Aristotle. So everyone can have be an Alexander the Great in terms of their learning, early on, I think that's cool. Like I would like that. I would like if I have kids to have that potential of like something that gets to know them really well and doesn't just tell them the answer like Google does or even ChatGPT, but is focused on helping them reason through questions. So when they ask, why is the sky blue? They start asking them the questions that help them get to that reasoning. But an analogy I found compelling for it: what does education over the next decade look like in the age of AI?
Hmm.
Where, as I said, I think it'll be malpractice for someone to try diagnosing. It's like it would be malpractice right now for someone to diagnose someone with chest pain without doing an ECG, right?
Hmm.
So that's where technology is essential to get a better understanding. I think just on top of that, the layer of an AI that knows every ECG in the world and every outcome and every drug interaction, I think it'd be malpractice for a doctor to just not rely on an AI to at least look at the ECG before they do in the next decade. So where does it leave doctors in pattern recognition? What do humans do best? I think caring is one, but even that's sort of in, debate because especially with telehealth or with chatbots can have empathy, and have more patience than an average human. So I think it's more like in-person physical caring that humans can do better. I think obviously procedural skills, like a trauma surgeon, I think it's going to be very hard to replace trauma surgery anytime soon because that's such an unbounded problem of like, what are people coming in with? But an analogy I really like was that, people don't really have to go to the gym. Gyms were initially set up for hard laborers to get, to be, and also just the fact of them doing hard labor, they had to lift things, they had to, plow, they had to shovel, all that stuff. But now, because we have robots that do a lot of that stuff, humans don't have to be,
Hmm.
able to bench 350 in or something, right? You don't have to. It's sort of just entertainment with football, or it's people want to be bodybuilders or have strength. It's a little vanity to some extent. With education, it's sort of similar, where like maybe schools become the gyms of the mind, where you don't have to, have someone know all this stuff, like because the AI knows it all. But if you want to learn and self-actualize and, pull on that curiosity thread, that's where you go to school and learn how to do things. Even though, like chess is a good example. I love playing chess. It's been a long time since a human could consistently beat. It's impossible. Humans can't consistently beat computers anymore at chess. But people still play chess a lot. Um, and I think that's because it's fun. It's self-actualization. I think similarly, we'll hopefully learn for the sake of learn. Um, and hopefully there'll be enough people who have novel insights and creative insights and know how to work with AI that would still push humanity forward in the way that it should be.
That's really interesting, especially the kind of human elements that you still see remaining within all the skill of algorithm and software. So we're spending time talking about the future. I'd love to spend our last bit of time chatting together and talk a little bit about Ganglia Ventures. One question off the bat is, am I reading too much into the fact that the name is a rearrangement of your last name letters? Is that a clever name, or is there some symbolism baked into that?
You're the first person who actually put two and two together. Like other people have seen Ganglia Ventures and they know what a ganglia is, but like you saw it, which is wonderful. Thank you for that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I realized like when I first learned about a ganglia, I was like, wow, that looks a lot like my last name. And then I changed the letters and I was like, oh my God, it's a perfect anagram. And it's kind of funny. I don't want to read too much into it, but like my like ethos has always been connecting with people. And the whole 1 + 1 = 3 cliche that everyone talks about, it is true with a ganglia. For those listeners who don't know what a ganglia is, the most famous ganglia is the basal ganglia, which is a series of structures in the brain that connect in interesting ways that lead to locomotion, being able to move around, lead to emotion. And so one of the famous parts of the basal ganglia is the substantia nigra, which has dopaminergic neurons, which tend to be destroyed during Parkinson's, and so lead to locomotive issues. So anyways, ganglia is where 1 + 1 = 3. You get some neuron cell bodies connecting to other neuron bodies, and then like emergent properties happen. And I've always liked that, where it's like, if I put me with my co-founder, we create Osmosis with a lot of other people and a lot of help along the way. If I take an idea from Silicon Valley, which is like ad retargeting, right? How do you Google and stuff, Facebook, they retarget you with ads. And we took that idea, put it to education, and called it ad retargeting, right? So it's like, if we know that today you learned about cystic fibrosis, tomorrow you'll get a push notification to your phone with a question about cystic fibrosis. That was our version of ad retargeting. So my whole ethos has been, how do you connect people to people, people to ideas, and ideas to ideas? And that became what is Ganglia Ventures. And so it's basically my family office. I was very blessed after the sale of Osmosis to have some funds to be able to make investments in mostly funds. I've mostly invested in other funds that backed Osmosis. And I get a lot of founders contacting me. I connect them to different funds, one of whom was they led their seed and then Series A. So I'm often trying to help founders get fundraising. There's some philanthropic stuff we do there, a lot for animal welfare, for environmental sustainability. And then there's just some advising and consulting I do through Ganglia Ventures. And so I think about 10 companies right now I've been working with in some capacity through Ganglia. And then one of the companies that I was working with as an advisor, it was being incubated out of a healthcare insurance company called Care First, which is the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Maryland. Their studio happens to be run by a good friend of mine. Speaking of connecting people, named Mike Batista, and he and I even hiked Kilimanjaro together 2.5 years ago. Like we go way back. We're really close friends. So I was advising this company, and then they asked me to be their founder or CEO. So I'm starting to my participation with Ganglia, be back as a founder, and going back to something we talked about, which is how the narrative fallacy exists. I will say it's not just the first time founders who are like in the wilderness and have ups and downs. Like literally being a founder of this new company, I'm like reminded of some of those ups and downs of Osmosis. And I'm like, wow, like this is easier in many ways from a fundraising and resourcing perspective. It's much easier than the early days of Osmosis. But from like a idea hitting the market, trying to get product market fit or founder market fit, it's very hard. It's still very difficult. And in some ways, it's even harder to do it the second time because they don't need to. Like it's almost like you're going through the pain without needing to go through the pain, versus the first time around was like, I need to do this. And so it's sort of the burn the bridges phenomenon that Vikings had, which is like, when we land at a place, we're going to conquer it. And the way we're going to conquer it and not escape is we're going to actually burn the bridges or burn the boats. And so we have no escape plan. This is our only plan. Anyways, just getting real with people who are thinking about second time founding or whatnot for a company.
That sounds exciting, but also scary. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thought process and how you're exploring this new need area. I think I may know what it is, but that might be a different project you're working on. So uh, I'm just curious how you've been digging in to see what signals are there and to start testing the waters and kind of validating this new need that you're looking into.
Yeah, I'm going back to the polygram essays of doing things that don't scale and how to build startups. I think that's very good wisdom still, even though tons of things have changed now. Some ways it's easier because you can prototype products much easier and faster than a decade ago. In other ways, it's harder because again, distribution I think is a competitive advantage, and that's why we have influencers and starting products and companies. It's because they have distribution, they have attention. The two criteria I had going into any company I work with, especially one that I would be an operator and actually spend more time on,
Mm.
were one, it has to be a problem I really care about, that I really resonate with deeply. Like Osmosis was relatively easy because worst case, if we didn't succeed as a company, I would learn a lot about how to learn in medicine. And that those skill sets would be useful to go through and finish med school. So, and the second is it with people I really like and trust. So if this was like a random idea with people I didn't know, I would not have done it. But because Mike was involved, a former Osmosis investor in Gurdane, Bhutani at MBX Capital was involved. And because another thing that makes it easier the second time around is I was able to bring a bunch of my former teammates to help work with me already. So there's already like an installed base of trust and friendship with some of these teammates. I was like, yeah, we can do this. Many of my best friends have come through Osmosis, and including some of my closest advisors, one of whom I'd consider a second dad. Um, and so it made me realize that doing a company, like taking action in the world by building a new thing, would be a good opportunity to do that with more people. So I've had, because of even in the like last month and a half, been working on this new company, I've been able to reconnect with people who I hadn't spoken to in a while, because now there's a reason to beyond just checking in and being a friend. And I've been able to meet new people who are very interesting. For example, I had most recently an former EPA administrator on a new podcast I've been launching for this company. She was the governor of New Jersey too. Very interesting woman, Christine Todd Whitman. I wouldn't have spoken to her had I not been working on this new company. So just high level, the company right now is called Dwelling.health. And essentially what we're trying to do is combine the home services market with the longevity market and help people improve the health of their home, right? Everyone spends a lot of money and time taking care of their home. We want to equip them so their home can take care of them by doing the 20% of things that get you 80% of the benefits. So the joke is, like, I spent the last decade selling Osmosis and working on Osmosis. Now I'm spending a lot of time thinking about reverse osmosis, because like installing a reverse osmosis water filter can be a very beneficial thing to help eliminate PFOA, PFAS, heavy metals, and other contaminants in the water. And that's like 20% of the thing that gets you 80% of the way there. And how do you make that super easy? Because a lot of people don't actually have that or an air filter. They don't know about radon mitigation, which is the second leading cause of lung cancer after smoking. And the leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers is radon exposure. Asthma. Children who live in houses with gas stoves, 47% higher chance of having asthma than those with electric stoves.
Wow.
So like if you have a family history of asthma, or if you have a child who could be predisposed to asthma, it could be worth either buying a home, renting a home, or replacing the gas stove in your home, or at least making sure it isn't leaking, PM 2.5 and other contaminants. So anyways, it's an interesting problem space where I've like, oh, that's really cool. And for people I really like, I don't know where it's going to go, but it's been fun so far learning about the space and being able to help some people along the way with it.
That's really cool. I have the unverified sense that this is a set of problems that people are starting to pay more attention to also. It seems like you probably have really good timing sort of noticing these problems and starting to give them attention.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the zeitgeist seems to be upon us.
Yes.
Even see like
Better said. Yeah.
Well, people like Eric Topol, who we've collaborated with in the past. He was just in Mel Robbins last month talking about 7 toxic products in your home,
Wow.
ranging from like the plastic cutting boards to scented candles that you could, mitigate because people are
Wow.
paying more attention to it. And so obviously Eric Topol is like a mentor. I have great faith in. Unlike a lot of influencers, I feel like I can still rely on his unvarnished opinions on things because he seems to dive into the data,
Yeah.
and then isn't trying to sell you a protein bar after doing that. But yeah,
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Um, I want to be conscious of the time here, and I have one more question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. When you think of people who may be at the beginning of their journey, maybe not even on their journey yet, and would love to be on a journey, or you think of folks from these 10 companies that you've been advising, what is the advice that you think would move the needle the most for someone at the very beginning who maybe has a passion, nothing else, maybe has an idea, but doesn't really know where to take it? Um, what would you tell them?
yeah. I think first of all advice is contextual. So you can always find advice. You should really focus, or you should open your mind. Like you can always find competing advice, and so understanding the context for that advice beyond what Twitter or a YouTube short or TikTok short gives you, right? Digging in, I think, is really important. I would say action often leads to good things, increasing your luck surface area. So if you have an idea, never been easier to love, well, or bold, or some vibe coding tools to like prototype it and think about it. And the problem of focus can be solved later. Like initially, like you want to have a lot of ideas, see what sticks, and then as you get signal and understanding what signal is, you can then decide where to focus. Because I think a lot of people they prematurely close on things. It's like being a doctor, right? You want to have a wide differential first, and then get signal in any one of these things, and also be clear about what the workup is needed to rule in or rule out any of these differentials. I think the same thing for and this is actually where medicine was really helpful. Going through
Mm,
that process again and again of differential expansion to then closing, and knowing what your cognitive biases is a tool that startup founders can use too. Um, so I would say, look, like it's what we talked about, like meet people like David, meet people like me, like people you want to get to know, people hopefully you want to get to know after listening to us. Um, and, and like just enjoy the journey by becoming friends with these people as opposed to just seeing what they can do for you, like seeing how you can actually make the day-to-day experience of your journey as enjoyable as possible.
wow, that's incredible advice. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Shiv. This has been really special, and I would love to know where people can find you online.
Yeah, no, David, thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure reconnecting with you. And the way people can find me is on LinkedIn. Just send me a LinkedIn note. I'm the only Shiv Gaglani there. And I'm more than happy to connect with anyone listening.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much.